You walk out of an airport terminal into air that smells entirely unfamiliar. You don't know the language, you don't know the streets, and more importantly, no one here knows you.
Right.
The person they expect you to be back home just doesn't exist here. And in that quiet space, a strange, light feeling washes over you. Who are you going to be today?
It is a profound, almost um, echoing emptiness, but not a lonely emptiness. It's the emptiness of a completely blank slate.
Yeah. You aren't the responsible one, or the quiet one, or the anxious one today. There's no history, no past mistakes, and really no expectations hanging over your head.
Exactly.
It's thrilling, but maybe a tiny bit terrifying, too. You are suddenly untethered from every single social anchor that normally holds you in place. And the relief of that, I mean, it can honestly be overwhelming.
It really can. And we rarely get to experience that level of unburdening in our daily lives because, well, from the moment we wake up in our own beds, we are stepping right into a pre-existing narrative.
Oh, absolutely.
You are the employee, you're the parent, the sibling, the reliable friend. Or maybe you're the person who always organizes the dinners, or the one who never complains.
The one who has it all together.
Right. You have an assigned role, and your community expects you to play it. So walking out of that foreign terminal it's the very first moment you actually step off the stage.
I love that imagery because that feeling of walking out of the terminal, it isn't just vacation joy, it's a massive, measurable psychological reset.
It is.
And today, we're taking a stack of sociological studies, travel psychology, and behavioral research to break down exactly why it is so deeply exhausting to just be ourselves at home.
Yeah, to play that role.
Right. We're looking into what physically happens in our brains when we shed our skins abroad and how stepping out of our normal geographic context reveals the hidden and somewhat fragile structures of our own identities. If you value conversations like this, you can stay with us here.
Because to truly understand why that airport terminal feels so liberating, we kind of have to start by looking at the invisible cage we were sitting in before we even boarded the flight.
The cage of our own lives.
Exactly. And for that, we look to the sociologist Irving Goffman. He introduced this concept called the dramaturgical approach to human interaction.
The dramaturgical approach, meaning treating everyday life like a literal stage play.
That's the one.
But I have to push back a little here because, I mean, that sounds incredibly cynical. It makes it sound as though we're all just sociopaths manipulating our families and friends rather than, just acting out of genuine love and habit. Are we really just faking it all the time?
I get that. It feels cynical until you look at the mechanics of it. Goffman wasn't arguing that we're malicious or deceptive.
Okay.
In his work, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, he posited that human interaction is constructed to provide others with impressions that align with our goals. And often, those goals are simply social harmony and mutual comfort.
Just keeping the peace, essentially.
Right. Our identity is closely tied to what he calls a front. This front is the standardized, collective representation of our social roles. It consists of our setting, our appearance, and our manner.
Okay.
It's basically how we make the world predictable for the people we care about.
So it's less about manipulation and more about consistency, like being a typecast actor in a long-running sitcom.
Yes, perfect analogy.
Everyone expects you to play the exact same character every single week. You wear the same costume, you walk onto the same set, and your friends and family they're basically the live studio audience who already know all your catchphrases.
Right, and they feel safe when you hit your marks.
Exactly.
That is a very accurate way to visualize it. Because the reason we feel so exhausted and trapped at home is because that audience, your family, your friends, your colleagues, demands utter consistency from your character.
They need you to be you.
Yeah. And here is the exhausting part. Goffman notes that this front must be maintained regardless of your actual internal mental state.
Oh, wow. So even if you're falling apart.
Exactly. You have to sustain the performance even if you feel entirely hollow inside. He uses a really fascinating example of a doctor who is forced to give a placebo to a patient.
Wait, the doctor knows the medicine does absolutely nothing but prescribes it anyway? How does that fit into a front?
Because the patient has defined the setting and the role of the doctor. The patient walks into the clinic expecting extensive treatment.
Right. They want a cure.
Right. And the doctor is fully aware of the impotence of the placebo. But to maintain the social harmony of that interaction, to fulfill the cultural expectation of what a healer does, the doctor must perform the role of the confident physician dispensing medicine.
Oh, I see.
They must perform, even if they lack faith in the performance themselves. And we do this in micro ways every single day.
We perform competence in a meeting when we're secretly terrified,
Yes.
or cheerfulness at a family dinner when we're grieving, or reliability when we're just, completely exhausted, all because the audience's reality depends on it.
Exactly. The audience needs the play to continue.
Well, if you have to spend all day, every day, pretending to be the solid object everyone expects you to be, it makes complete sense that the fantasy of buying a plane ticket and disappearing is so universal. You just want the curtain to drop.
And when we travel, we engage in a highly specific behavior Goffman calls audience segregation.
Audience segregation.
Yeah. We intentionally change our environments to physically remove the audience. We leave the people who demand our specific performance behind on another continent.
Right.
And this allows us to recreate the self. But Goffman goes a step further here. He believed that to fully define the self, we need voluntary consequential action. We need to take existential risks.
But everyday life doesn't really offer that.
No, it doesn't. With its predictable routines and heavy expectations, there aren't many opportunities for true existential risk.
Because the script is already written. If you take a risk at home, you risk disappointing the audience. You risk losing your job, upsetting your spouse, confusing your friends.
The stakes of breaking character are just too high. But when you're anonymous in a new place, you are completely stripped of your protective front. You are finally taking an existential risk.
Because every interaction is unscripted.
Exactly. You don't know the cultural rules, you don't know the language, you have no reputation to fall back on. The experience of the action itself becomes more important than how you are socially perceived.
Because when you step off that plane, the audience is gone. The script is just thrown out the window.
Right.
But I want to pause on the physical sensation of that moment. What is actually happening in our brains when the scenery changes so drastically? Because dropping the script sounds great in theory, but in practice, the first few days of a trip in a foreign country can be intensely stressful.
Oh, absolutely.
We don't always feel liberated right away. Sometimes we just feel deeply disoriented.
Right. And to understand the mechanics of that disorientation, we have to look to Jack Meziro's perspective transformation theory.
Okay.
Meziro explains that we naturally function from a set of habitual expectations.
Habitual expectation.
Yeah. These are the frames of reference, the mental shortcuts, shaped by lifelong socialization. They are our default settings, designed by the brain to conserve energy.
Like the autopilot we use to navigate our daily lives so we don't have to consciously think about how to buy groceries or commute to work.
Yes, exactly. And Meziro argues that profound psychological transformation only happens when we encounter a disruptive event, something that completely shatters that regular pattern of thinking.
I see.
If we don't encounter situations that actively challenge our perspectives, those perspectives remain permanently fossilized.
So travel is essentially an engineered disruptive event. We're paying money to intentionally break our own autopilot.
It is the ultimate disruptive event. And the researcher Richard Keeley expanded on this with his transformative learning model. He broke this process down into 5 distinct dimensions.
Okay, let's walk through those.
Sure, but keep in mind they don't happen all at once.
Yeah.
First, there is the contextual border crossing. This isn't just physical travel. It's the moment you realize the rules of your home country no longer apply.
Like, you try to order a coffee and suddenly you realize the social cues, the physical distance between people, the tone of voice, literally none of it matches what you know.
Which triggers the second dimension dissonance. This is the intense clash between what your brain expects to happen and what actually happens.
And neurologically, this is where that feeling of exhaustion and disorientation comes from, right?
Yes. Your brain is suddenly deprived of all its mental shortcuts. It has to consciously process every single stimulus.
Let's slow down and look at dissonance for a second, because I think people often confuse this with just having a bad time on vacation. What is physically happening in the nervous system during that clash? Why does the brain interpret a foreign environment, even a beautiful one, as a threat?
Because the brain prioritizes predictability over pleasure.
Wow. Predictability over pleasure.
Always. Predictability means safety. When your habitual expectations are shattered, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, flags the environment as unpredictable.
So even if nothing is actually wrong...
Right. You might be in a gorgeous piazza in Rome, but if you don't know how to read the social cues of the waiter approaching you, your nervous system experiences a low-grade fight-or-flight response.
That is fascinating.
That dissonance forces the third dimension, which is personalizing the conflict. You realize the friction isn't just about the external world, it's about your internal limitations.
You start questioning yourself, like, am I bad at this? Why am I so anxious? Why can't I just relax like everyone else?
Exactly. And that internal questioning leads to the fourth dimension, processing. This is where you begin to reflect on your own discomfort.
Okay.
And finally, the fifth dimension, connecting. You integrate this new, uncomfortable experience into a broader, more flexible understanding of the world and yourself.
I want to bring in a powerful real-world example here that anchors all five of these dimensions. It comes from the work of a travel psychologist who studied solo travel and self-discovery.
Yeah, the lion study.
Right. She looked at a student who had grown up in an East Asian collectivist culture. And this is a crucial detail because the front she was carrying was profoundly heavy.
Extremely heavy. In collectivist cultures, psychological research shows people tend to develop an interdependent sense of self.
Interdependent.
Yeah, meaning identity isn't viewed as a standalone, individualistic core of desires. Identity is formed through relationships, obligations, and group harmony. Who you are is defined by how well you maintain the social fabric.
So her identity was entirely defined by being academically successful, reliable, and above all, never disappointing her parents.
Right.
Her sitcom character was the flawless daughter, but she decides to travel alone to Europe. And her first solo flight doesn't even land where it's supposed to.
A nightmare scenario for someone who relies on predictability.
Right. Due to a massive weather system, her flight to Geneva is unexpectedly diverted to Lyon, France.
A textbook disruptive event. The contextual border crossing is just forced upon her abruptly.
She is alone, exhausted. It's the middle of the night in a city she didn't plan to be in. And to make matters worse, through the exhaustion, she realizes she booked her subsequent hostel in the completely wrong city.
That is a massive injection of dissonance.
Yeah.
The brain's predictive models completely fail.
In that moment, she is spiraling into panic, disbelief, and deep shame. In psychological terms, she experiences the total closing of her window of tolerance.
Yes.
She's sitting on her luggage, gripping her journal, and even though she is thousands of miles away from home, the loudest things in her head are the imagined voices of her parents, heavily criticizing her for being reckless, for making a mistake, for failing.
And notice how even when the physical audience is removed, the internalized audience remains.
Right. The voices are inside the house.
Exactly. Her dramaturgical front was so deeply ingrained in her neurology that her own nervous system was punishing her for stepping out of line. She was still trying to perform competence for an audience sitting on another continent.
But here's where Keeley's processing and connecting dimensions actually happen. In that quiet, terrifying moment of total failure, far away from anyone who knew her name, something shifted.
Yeah.
She realized that self-blame wasn't going to get her a bed for the night. She had no audience to perform her shame for. If she cried, no one from her family was there to be disappointed.
Nobody was watching the play.
Right. If she panicked, no one was there to judge her. And for the very first time, without the deafening noise of her parents' expectations, she could hear her own inner voice. She showed herself self-compassion. She forgave herself for the mistake, picked up her bags, and figured it out.
And if we connect this to the broader research on international student identity, it beautifully illustrates a shift from an old way of viewing human psychology to a new one.
How so?
Well, for a long time, cross-cultural research relied on a highly linear acculturation model. It assumed identity was a fixed Newtonian system, like clockwork, cause and effect. You leave one culture, you absorb another, and you arrive at a fixed end state.
I always struggle with that Newtonian analogy. If Newtonian physics is just clockwork, just predictable cause and effect, how does that apply to human identity? Are we saying old psychology viewed humans like simple machines?
In many ways, yes, it did. The old models suggested that if you put an individual in a new environment, input A, they will linearly adapt and become a new fixed person output B.
Like a math equation.
Exactly. It viewed identity as a solid core, a singular essence you carry around inside you. But modern research, particularly studies applying complexity theory to international student identity, completely dismantles that.
Okay, complexity theory.
Yeah, in complexity theory, life is irrational, open, and uncontrollable. You must view identity as an open, fluid, emergent, and non-linear system.
Emergent, meaning it doesn't exist until it interacts with something else.
Precisely. You don't just delete your old self and download a new one. You interact with your environment dynamically. Identity isn't a solid core waiting to be uncovered. It's a constant process of self-organization in response to disequilibrium.
This completely changes the metaphor. Does this mean our true self isn't actually a solid object buried in the sand waiting to be dug up, but more like water? It just takes the shape of whatever container we pour it into.
That is a much more accurate framework. Identity is highly relational and performative.
Okay.
The student stranded in Lyon didn't find a brand new, solid self hiding in the French terminal. She encountered a new container, the unexpected, unscripted crisis, and her identity reorganized itself fluidly to meet that specific moment.
Wow.
Free from the old container of her parents' expectations, the water took a new shape. She exercised what theorists call self-authorship.
And the high of that self-authorship is intoxicating. I mean, it completely explains why people seem to become utterly different versions of themselves when they hit the road.
It really does.
Which leads us to look at how this idea appears in the real routines and behaviors of everyday travelers. Because once you see this pattern, you honestly see it everywhere.
It is highly documented, particularly in online travel communities, where anonymity allows for raw honesty.
Yeah, we looked at massive discussions on platforms like Reddit where everyday travelers confess to this exact phenomenon. People who describe themselves as naturally docile, extremely shy, or even struggling with heavy depression at home suddenly become wildly extroverted, confident, and spontaneous the minute their passport is stamped.
What is fascinating about the temporary extrovert is the survival mechanism operating underneath the playfulness.
Right.
One user, Geog95, explicitly noted that they have to be extroverted to survive solo travel. To meet people, to bond with locals, to navigate the sheer logistics of being alone in a foreign place, they are forced to deploy a secondary extroverted personality. It's a pragmatic adaptation to an open system.
It's pure survival, but it morphs into genuine joy. Another user talked about introducing themselves by a nickname instead of their real name.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, they make jokes, they photobomb strangers, behaviors they would never, ever dare attempt at home. They noted that at home they used to fade into the background, they let people walk all over them because, historically, they didn't think they deserved taking up space.
Right.
But abroad, free from the fear of their hometown's judgment, they realized everyone is in the same boat. Everyone is alone, everyone is slightly lost, and everyone is looking to connect.
This brings us right back to God. Home, if the shy, docile person suddenly starts photobombing strangers, their established audience and the planes, their friends and family would react with shock, confusion, or even concern.
They'd think something was wrong with them.
Exactly. The social feedback loop would unconsciously punish the deviation, pushing them back into their quiet box. But abroad, there is no established baseline. The new audience accepts the extroverted performance as the authentic self.
It's like you get a free pass to audition for a radically different role, and the new audience immediately buys it. They don't know you're faking it, so they treat you like a confident extrovert.
Right.
And because they treat you like a confident extrovert, you actually become one.
And over time, as the research shows, that performance alters the internal state. By continually acting confidently in new, unpredictable situations, getting lost in a Medina, managing dwindling budgets, dealing with missed trains, they begin to build genuine self-esteem and resilience.
The water takes the new shape.
Yes, the water gets used to holding that new shape, and that confidence lingers even after they return.
But this identity shift isn't always just about finding your loud, fun side at a hostel. There is another manifestation of this that goes much deeper into the realm of profound grief and loss.
We're talking about the spiritual tourist.
Right.
This is where we see travel utilized not just as an escape or a vacation, but as a critical, desperate identity reconstruction project. Research bridging tourism, existential psychology, and identity highlights that spiritual tourism is deeply tied to meaning-making after a collapse.
But what happens if the sitcom you've been starring in gets canceled entirely? I mean, if you lose your job or a spouse, it's not just a vacation, your stage is gone.
Yeah.
Does the brain react the same way to travel?
The reaction is much more intense because the disruptive event has already occurred at home.
Oh, I see.
Bereavement, a devastating job loss, a divorce, or a critical health issue. These crises cause what researchers call identity dissolution. The socially constructed roles that define their existence, the dramaturgical fronts they spent decades building, suddenly collapse into dust.
Like the senior executive in the research who lost his job and admitted he had absolutely no idea who he was without his professional designation.
Yes, exactly.
He had played the role of the provider and the boss for so long that there was no backstage left. Or a bereaved mother who feels she is drowning every time she wakes up in her own home, surrounded by the echoes of her child. Their front stage has been violently destroyed.
The framework of their existence is gone. Realizing their own mortality or the extreme fragility of their social roles completely reorients their priorities.
They can't just go back to normal.
No, they can no longer tolerate conventional life trajectories. So they travel. They seek out existential value propositions, experiences in the remote mountains of Nepal, or walking the Camino de Santiago, experiences that offer awe, wonder, physical exhaustion, and release.
They are using the dissonance of travel to make meaning beyond the roles they used to play.
Right. They are searching for transcendence, a unified wholeness beyond the distinct, shattered self.
There are more people thinking about this than you might expect. We all feel the weight of our roles, and we all wonder who we would be if those roles were stripped away, either by choice or by tragedy.
This naturally leads us to look at the absolute furthest edge of this spectrum. Because to truly understand the psychology of anonymity, we have to look at what happens when the front becomes a permanent survival mechanism, rather than a temporary relief.
We have to look at individuals who travel under completely assumed identities. This could be whistleblowers evading retaliation, individuals escaping severe domestic abuse who seek sanctuary in non-extradition countries, or people facing profound legal entanglements.
It's an extreme reality.
Right. And without getting into the politics or validating the legality of what they're doing, the psychological data here is staggering. What happens to the human mind when you are forced into a permanent performance, when there is absolutely no backstage?
The research points to a devastating psychological toll. The primary issue is a chronic, extreme form of identity dissonance.
Identity dissonance.
Yes, when you are constantly toggling between your deeply buried true identity and a completely fabricated persona, it creates massive, unresolvable cognitive friction. You struggle to reconcile your authentic history with the role you must flawlessly play in public every single day.
Because it's not a vacation anymore.
No, it leads to profound confusion and the gradual loss of a coherent sense of self.
Because they can never, ever drop the performance, not even for a second. I mean, if the student in Leone makes a mistake, she just has an embarrassing night. If these individuals break character, they lose their freedom or their lives.
The stakes demand constant, unrelenting vigilance. Every interaction, from buying bread at the local market to speaking with a neighbor, is calculated and scripted to avoid raising suspicion.
That sounds exhausting.
This perpetual state of hypervigilance is neurologically exhausting. The amygdala never powers down. Furthermore, it necessitates lying to anyone they meet, which deeply erodes the human capacity for trust and intimacy.
You can't let anyone in.
No. It invariably triggers a dark existential crisis. What does it mean to be authentic when your entire physical survival depends on living a lie? Can you ever experience true love or connection under false pretenses?
Add to that the sheer emotional toll of severing ties with their past life. The profound grief and isolation of leaving family behind, knowing you can never call them without putting them at risk, it's an incredibly heavy reality.
It is.
But looking at this extreme really clarifies something vital for the rest of us. It proves that while temporary anonymity is incredibly liberating and expanding, forced, permanent anonymity can actually shatter the mind's coherence.
Yes, that distinction is crucial.
We crave the freedom of anonymity, yes, but we also desperately, biologically need genuine connection. We need a coherent narrative that someone else bears witness to.
This raises a critical question about how we view our own everyday desires to escape. We often carry a heavy sense of guilt when we notice ourselves acting differently in different contexts.
Yeah, we feel a profound, uncomfortable disconnect between the wild, spontaneous person we are abroad and the quiet, reserved person we are at home.
And society constantly tells us that we need to find ourselves, as if our identity is a singular, unchangeable object. We are bombarded with the idea that consistency equals authenticity.
Be true to yourself, never change.
Right. So if you are deeply confused about who you are when you travel, or if you notice that you feel like a completely different person depending on whether you're talking to your boss, your mother, or a stranger in a hostel, it feels like a moral failure. You feel like a fraud.
But it is not a failure. It is not weakness. And it is not something broken inside of you. It is a deeply human pattern. Modern psychology, particularly in the realm of acculturation and complexity theory, has forcefully moved away from the idea that identity is a zero-sum game.
It used to be thought that if you gain a new culture, you must lose a piece of your old one. But now, we understand the concept of the additive identity.
Additive identity. I really like the sound of that. How does that practically work?
It means that a healthy human mind constructs a narrative identity that is capable of holding multiple cultures, multiple languages, and entirely different roles simultaneously.
So they don't cancel each other out.
Exactly. You don't lose the quiet, responsible self when you discover the spontaneous, extroverted self in a foreign city. You simply add a new chapter to your internal narrative. You expand your repertoire. You are not replacing, you are accumulating.
But wait, if that's true, why do we feel so guilty about code switching? We feel like we're being fake if we act one way with locals in a foreign country. Maybe we're more expressive, we use bolder gestures, we speak a different language with a different cadence, and then we act entirely differently when we FaceTime our family back home. It feels deceptive.
It feels deceptive only if you cling to the Newtonian idea of a single, fixed self. But researcher Andy Holliday offers a brilliant reframe. He suggests that culture is actually a resource.
A resource?
Yeah. Multicultural individuals, or even just observant travelers, selectively draw on a collection of symbols, behaviors, and tones to achieve a particular purpose in a particular setting.
It is like holding a deck of different identity cards, and you simply play the card that best fits the social reality of the room you're standing in.
Exactly. It's not being fake, and it's not being deceptive. It is a pragmatic, highly evolved social skill. It is cross-cultural code switching. You are organizing the interaction to create mutual understanding.
That removes so much of the shame. You aren't losing your mind or being an imposter. You're just a complex human being navigating an open system. You are adapting to the container.
And to navigate that open system effectively, to truly expand that deck of identity cards, we actually have to lean into the discomfort of the unknown.
Oh, this is fascinating.
If we look at language learning research, there is a concept called optimal distance. Linguists found that learners acquire a new language best when they are slightly uncomfortable, when there is a sustained tension between their native language and the target language.
Because different languages aren't just different words for the same things. They carry entirely different value systems, different histories, and different ways of seeing the world.
Yes. If a learner gets too comfortable in the new culture, if they stop experiencing that friction, they hit a plateau. This is a process known as fossilization.
Fossilization.
Yeah. Their learning completely stops. The brain no longer feels the need to adapt. On the other hand, if they remain too distant, if the distance is too high, and they cling entirely to their home culture out of fear, they learn nothing at all.
So they just shut down.
Right. The sweet spot of human growth, the optimal distance, is a perpetual state of mild discomfort and uncertainty.
That is profound. The anxiety you feel when you are lost in a new city, or struggling to communicate with a shopkeeper, or sitting alone at a cafe wondering what you're doing with your life. That anxiety isn't a sign of weakness.
Not at all.
It's not a sign that you are failing at travel. It's the exact, literal, physical sensation of your brain expanding. Feeling uncomfortable is fundamental for deepening learning. You simply do not learn much inside your comfort zone.
No, you don't. Growth requires the disruption of your habitual expectations.
Yeah.
And this neurological reality helps explain why the hardest, most painful part of travel isn't the journey itself, or the lost luggage, or the language barrier.
No.
The hardest part is the return.
The dreaded return home. We see this everywhere in the accounts we looked at. Travelers report that their depression or their profound anxiety, which seemed to completely vanish while they were backpacking through Southeast Asia or walking across Spain, comes rushing right back the moment they step into their apartment.
It's like a wave.
Right. Or they feel themselves being slowly, inevitably sucked back into their old, quiet routines. One person wrote, "After you sleep off the jet lag, it feels like you never left. It feels like the person I was over there was just a dream." The local culture and social structures of home are so deeply ingrained that the new identity just fades away.
If we connect this back to our deep human need for belonging, that rapid fading makes perfect sense. From early childhood, our identities have been profoundly shaped by our relationships. As we discussed with Goffman's dramaturgical front, we are born into a repertoire of roles. We are someone's child, someone's partner, someone's employee. We belong to others so deeply, and our biological survival has depended so heavily on maintaining those bonds of affection and approval that we easily forget how to belong to ourselves.
Travel strips all of that away and reveals the sheer weight of the unspoken roles we carry.
It does.
But if travel teaches us that we are entirely capable of being confident, joyful, and spontaneous when no one expects anything from us, why do we let the expectations of the people who love us most shrink us back down? Why do we instantly revert the moment we see our families?
Because the environment we return to is utterly saturated with environmental cues that trigger our old, habitual expectations. The social gravity of our home environment is immense.
Social gravity.
Yeah. Your family and friends, despite loving you, have a vested interest in you remaining the person they have always known. Because if you come back loud, spontaneous, and setting new boundaries, it forces them to renegotiate their own relationship with you.
I see.
It introduces disequilibrium into their system. So entirely unconsciously, they exert subtle pressure on you to conform to your old identity card.
It's the sitcom audience demanding you say your classic catchphrase. They want the comfort of the character they know, even if playing that character makes you miserable.
And we comply because we fear losing their love.
Right.
But the ultimate synthesis of all this research, the realization that ties all these studies together, is that anonymity isn't just an escape, it is a mirror.
A mirror.
Yes. As the therapy specialist Vic Patterson notes, when nobody knows your story, you are temporarily freed from your roles. You don't have to be the competent colleague or the reliable friend. And instead of disappearing into nothingness, you actually become more yourself.
You didn't become a magically new person in that foreign city. You didn't download a new personality. You just finally stopped carrying the immense, exhausting baggage of everyone else's perception of you. The extrovert, the confident problem solver, the spontaneous adventurer who can navigate a missed flight in France that was you all along. Growth isn't about becoming someone new. It's about finally giving yourself the silence needed to hear the person you've always been trying to emerge.
It is the definitive shift from relying on external expectations to true self-authorship. You are no longer just flawlessly performing the script you were handed by your culture, your parents, or your peers. You realize that the system is open, and you are actively writing the narrative.
If this conversation felt true for you, you're always welcome here. You can subscribe to Leone Patterns and continue with us.
As we step back and look at the whole picture, we started with that quiet, thrilling, and slightly terrifying feeling of walking out of an airport terminal into total anonymity. We saw how we spend our lives heavily managing the dramaturgical front, performing exhaustion for an audience that demands consistency to feel safe.
We looked at the science of disruptive events, exploring how stepping out of our habitual expectations forces our nervous systems to reorganize. We saw how everyday people use travel to shed their docile selves, how those facing immense grief use it to reconstruct their shattered identities, and we examined the heavy psychological toll of forced, permanent anonymity.
And we reframed the confusion of code switching. We saw it not as a failure of authenticity or a deceptive manipulation, but as the brilliant deployment of an additive identity. We realized that the deep discomfort of being lost in a new place is the exact physical mechanism of growth. Ultimately, we saw that our identity is not a fixed, rigid cage, but a fluid, emergent story we are constantly rewriting.
And the hardest part is bringing that fluid, expanding story back home to the people who think they already know exactly how your story ends.
Which leaves us with one final thought to mull over. You don't necessarily need an airplane ticket or a foreign terminal to find the profound freedom of anonymity. If the joy of travel comes from walking into a room where absolutely no one expects anything of you perhaps tomorrow, you can try giving that exact same gift to the people you already know.
Wow.
What would happen if we looked at our partners, our children, or our oldest friends and gave them the complete unburdened anonymity to just be whoever they are today, entirely without the heavy weight of their past?
Same pace, same questions. See you then.